Hello and welcome to podcast 6.1 of the Yessie and Jessie podcast. I'm your host, Jess. So, if you listened to podcast 6 of the Yessie and Jessie podcast series, you'll know that I wanted to talk about some kind of personal topics. I believe that I said I was going to talk about my post-traumatic stress disorder, um, my I'm not sure if I mentioned this in another video, but this will be a video about um, I was sexually abused as a child. Um, so that and the post-traumatic stress disorder. And then I did say that I was going to talk about my birth story, but I think I'm going to make a separate video about that because that deserves its own video. It's a long, complicated thing. But yeah, Reacher is currently sitting next to me, being a good boy. I brought him in, like I said in the last podcast, so me and him are just hanging out in my basement. A little tidbit of information, even if I do sound happy in this podcast, I'm not. I'm having a really rough day. I'm currently in my basement smoking the hashish or whatever, I'm smoking the marijuanas, um, and trying to get ready for this video. I've tried recording this video already like 4 or 5 times. Sorry, podcast, I mean, not video. I'm trying to like amp myself up so I can talk about this because it's not a topic that I talk about a lot unless it's with my husband or my psychiatrist. So I might just make this a whole video about child abuse, sorry, child sexual abuse. I don't know if I'm going to include the post-traumatic stress disorder in this podcast because they're just the three topics that I mentioned in the beginning. They could all have their own video if I really wanted to. I thought though I would just dive right in and give you a few facts about child sexual abuse and just give you a little more information about the topic before I dive into what I'm going to talk about. So I'm just going to start off with what is child sexual abuse. It is any sexual activity between adults and minors, or it can also be between two minors, uh, when one forces themselves on one another. This includes sexual touching and non-touching acts like exhibition, exposure to pornography, photography of a child for sexual gratification, solicitation of a child for prostitution, voyeurism, and communication in a sexual way by phone, internet, or face-to-face. It is a crime punishable by law and must be reported. And I highly suggest that if you know of anybody that's been sexually abused, not even just as a child, just in general, um, or if you yourself have, I would report it. I would, I, if you're able to, that's what I would do. Um, Again, I'll get into a little more about why I feel that way, um, in the rest of the video. Also, if you are wondering why I, again, am a little weird in this video, it's because, well, one, I have anxiety, and two, I just feel like everybody's always listening to me. So I'm in my basement right now, but my husband's home. He's upstairs with the baby, and it's really difficult for me to talk about these things, even though I already talk about them with my husband. It's not a subject that I like talking about, but I feel like I need to get my thoughts out there today, because it's weighing heavy on my noggin. Um, I woke up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and just couldn't fall back asleep because I had a nightmare. I won't go into detail about what the nightmare was about. It just was not good. And, um, you know, if you're listening to this video, I'm sure you can assume what the nightmare was about. Uh, but yeah, so, and this happens not regularly anymore, but it happens often enough to where it impedes on my life. But enough about that. Um, so how often does child sexual abuse take place? Now, this is all from cachhouston.org, by the way. So the fact of the matter is the real prevalence of sexual child abuse is not known because so many victims do not disclose or report their abuse. This is something that I 100% for a fact know because this is something that happened to me for the longest time. And yes, I did report it, but I mean, I went like 10 years not reporting it. And I know other people, I'm not going to call them out because that's their story to tell. It's not my place to like dox them on what's happened in their life, but I know other people that have not came out to the police or to their parents or to their loved ones and probably won't ever do that. Um, there's a lot of people that keep it to themselves for their whole lives. I know other people that they have not come out to anyway, but yeah, you get the point. Um, so, and another fact, even if the true prevalence of child sexual abuse is not known, most will agree that there will be 500,000 babies born in the US this year that will be sexually abused before they turn 18 if we do not prevent it. Reading this fact right now makes me want to cry because I have a daughter. She's almost 2 years old. The fact that people can do this to children um, is horrible. I still can't wrap my head around why people do this. I know the reasons that people do it, but it just, I can't fathom um, looking at a child or looking at your child and doing that to your child. Now, looking at adult retrospective studies, it says that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men were sexually abused before the age of 18. This means there are more than 42 million adult survivors of child sexual abuse in the US, and that's a big number. Now, imagine how many of those are people that you know and they're not talking about this with other people and it's not known and those people are just living with that. It's something you don't think about in your day-to-day life. It's not one of those things that you want to think about in your day-to-day life. Now, this says the public is not aware of or sufficiently aware of child sexual abuse because 73% of child victims do not tell anybody about their abuse for at least a year. 45% of victims do not tell anyone for at least 5 years. Some never disclose. It says in here, some never disclose that this even happened to them. And that's what I was just talking about. Um, I know a ton of people. It's, I mean, once you come out with this and you find those people, uh, you realize how easily and how often this happens. I'm not trying to scare anybody with this podcast, by the way. Like, I'm just giving you facts and my story on what's happened. I'll get into what actually happened to me if you want details. I'm not quite sure. Uh, who you can skip. I'll put it at the end of the video so that you can skip over it if you don't want to hear because it is a little troublesome. Sorry I'm skipping all over the place in this video too because I'm just scatterbrained. This topic just makes me uncomfortable, but I feel like I need to do it because more people need to be aware of this, and now that I have a child, I feel like I need to educate others because I would never want this to happen to my child, let alone somebody else's child. Another fact that they state in this article is that most people think of adult rape as a crime of great proportion and significance. Most are unaware that children are victimized at a much higher rate than adults. This is something that I agree with, but you don't hear about the cases with children as much, and the only time that I really hear about any of that is on YouTube, and ironically, I'm sure these people are like getting demonetized for talking about it when it shouldn't be that way. That's a topic for another time. But this says nearly 70% of all reported sexual assaults occur to children ages 17 and under. Youths have a higher rate of sexual assault victimization than adults. In 2000, the sexual victimization rate for youths 12 to 17 was 2.3 times higher than for adults. Please, you don't have to be a helicopter parent, but please be vigilant of your children. Be vigilant of the signs that they give you, which I will give you some signs that children are being, or let me rephrase that your child could possibly be experiencing sexual abuse, or whoever it is in your life that you see with these symptoms or occurrences might be experiencing child sexual abuse. This is a good point. Fact: children of every gender, age, race, ethnicity, background, socioeconomic status, and family structure or are at risk. No child is immune. Family and acquaintances of child sexual abuse perpetrators have reported that they look for specific characteristics in children they choose to abuse. Perpetrators report that they look for passive, quiet, troubled, lonely children from single-parent or broken homes. This is not always the case. In my case, yes, I was quiet and I was a lonely child, very anxious, only wanted to be with my parents. I mean, now you look at it and you're like, oh, well, that's why. But my parents were together. They weren't having problems at the time. So it can happen to literally anyone, any circumstance. It doesn't matter if you're white, you're blue, you're green, you're 2, you're 15. It doesn't matter if your parents are divorced, they're together, you have a sibling, you don't. It can happen to anybody. Perpetrators frequently seek out children who are particularly trusting and work proactively to establish a trusting relationship before abusing them. Not infrequently, this extends to establishing a trusting relationship with the victim's family as well. Now, in the case of me, where it was my grandfather that was doing the abusing, it was my father's father, my grandfather on my dad's side. They were doing the abusing, so it's not like they had to establish a relationship with my family. They were already my family. Now, I was not a particularly trusting child, as they say in this article. I was, I guess, skittish would be the word. I was like a little, like, puppy. I followed my parents around, didn't want to be with other children. I did not trust adults, at all. It's a blur because, so I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning, but the sexual abuse that I experienced went on from the time that I was 3 or 4 years old until I was about 13 years old. So I don't know how much of that is me remembering, it's not really me remembering before the abuse. This happened my whole life as a child. I will say though that my grandfather, being my grandfather, and my parents thinking, oh, well, it's just my grandparents' house. Like, that made it so much easier for him to abuse me, because I had interactions with him that you wouldn't normally, if somebody from down the road is abusing you, they're not gonna be having, like, if your friend's dad is abusing you and they live down the road, it's not going to be like, okay, you're having sleepovers there like every weekend. Like, this was all the time. Like, I was being babysat by this person, and they had like open access to me, because my parents didn't know and were trusting of them because they're my family member. I guess now looking at it, I was at low risk for abuse because it says in this article that Family structure is the most important risk factor in a child's sexual abuse. Children who live with two married biological parents are at low risk for abuse. The risk can increase when children live with step-parents or single parents. Children living without either parent, a foster child, are 10 times more likely to be sexually abused than children that live with both biological parents. I know people that were in the foster system or have been adopted, and this is the case. Um, I almost all of those people tell me of the horrible stories that the experiences that they've had. It also says gender is also a major factor in sexual abuse. Females are 5 times more likely to be abused than males. The age of males being abused also plays a part. 8% of victims aged 12 to 17 are male. 26% of victims under the age of 12 are male. Now, age is a significant factor as well. The risk for children of all ages is is the same, but children are most vulnerable to abuse between the ages of 7 and 13. The median age for reported abuse is 9 years old. However, more than 20% of children are sexually abused before the age of 8. Now, in the case of me, like I said, it was 3 or 4 that it started. I have a timeline running in my brain at all times of my life, and I have a really, really good memory when it comes to events of significance, I guess you would say. Um, so I know that it was around 3 or 4. I'm not going to go into, why that is, but just trust me, it was 3 or 4 years old. Um, and I know other people that around that age of 8 is when it started, like they said in this article. Now, this is a good point that I did not know. It says that African American children have almost twice the risk of sexual abuse than white children. Children of Hispanic ethnicity have a slightly greater risk than non-Hispanic white children. I think personally this is because again, don't come for me, but I have people that I've spoken to that say that African American communities and Hispanic communities don't talk about this as often as white culture does. I don't know if that's true. That's just what I've heard. Again, this is just my opinion, but the same goes for autism. I think that's something that gets swept under the rug in these communities more often than white communities as well. I could do a whole video on that too. My iPad is currently dying, so I might have to cut this podcast short and make it into another segment. So this is it's going to be podcast 6.2 if you like this podcast. But now it says that the risk for sexual abuse is tripled for children whose parents are not in the labor force, whatever that means. It says children in low socioeconomic status households are 3 times as likely to be identified as a victim of child abuse. I'm just going to read a couple other facts for you. Okay, so who are the perpetrators of sexual abuse? They are mostly men, and they are usually respected members of the community drawn to settings where they gain access easily to children, like schools, clubs, and churches. They come from all age groups, races, religions, and socio-economic classes. Most victims know and trust their abusers, like in my case. It isn't strangers our children have to fear most. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, 21% of all paroled sex offenders in Texas reside in Harris County. Okay, so this is for Texas. Clearly, I said it was a Houston article. But this is a really interesting thing. So it's going to be mostly men, as it was in my case. And now, when they talk about gaining easy access, it wasn't at school or anything like that, but I mean, I'm his grandchild, so it was pretty, I think, straightforward that it was easy. Uh, and it doesn't take much for them to groom someone when they have that access to them. And that leads me into the next thing. When, where, how does child sexual abuse happen? Many perpetrators groom their victims and families. Now, I don't know about grooming my family. I can't really look back and say that there was a time I think that's happened. Um, I mean, the sense of trust, I guess, like the sense of like, oh, you can leave your kid with me and she'll be fine. Um, but it says perpetrators employ successively inappropriate comments and increasingly inappropriate touches and behaviors, so insidious that the abuse is often well underway before the child recognizes the situation as sexual or inappropriate. This is something I agree with. I had this happen. So in my case, I was a 90s kid. I loved being on the computer, and the computer was one of those things where, oh, well, I'm just sitting on grandpa's lap and I'm playing this video game or whatever. Like I'm playing on, I don't know, generalmills.com or something. And the next thing you know, their hand is on your leg or somewhere else inappropriate. You get the point. I'm not going to go into the details, but you understand what I'm saying. Or just, oh, I'm in the kitchen and I need to go get something on the other side of the kitchen. My grandparents, a little tidbit of information is that my grandparents had a very tiny kitchen. It was like a hallway. So if you had to go in there to get something, you always had to brush past somebody. So just, again, think of the situations that a little child could be in with a perpetrator like that. I think that I am actually going to just end the video right here by saying, what are the signs of possible sexual abuse? I will leave you off with this. Most victims do not display physical evidence of their abuse because their body's ability to heal is rapid. However, any genital irritation, infections, or painful bowel movements should be investigated immediately. Behavioral signs are more common and include depression, anxiety, anger, loss of appetite, withdrawal from normal activities, substance abuse, self-mutilation, fear of certain places or people, bedwetting, night sweats, nightmares, and thoughts of suicide, all of which I've had since I was a little bit before I was a teenager. I would say like a preteen. I've had every single one of these things, uh, and my parents didn't see anything. That's another topic for another time. But uh, it can also be sexual acting out. So if you see a child doing unchildlike things or trying to do what that perpetrator was doing to them, to some other kid, then you might have some problems on your hands, and uh, I would be concerned. Um, so yeah, I'm just gonna leave off the video with that. I will come back to this topic at another time and make the 6.2 and tell you kind of my story and my take on things. But these were just a few um, facts and a little bit of information on the topic I'll be talking about. Sorry again that this video is all messed up. I try to be on topic for my videos. I have not been able to make an outline for my video because Yessie has been up since like 6 o'clock in the morning for the past like 5 days, and she doesn't go to bed until like 8 or 9 o'clock. So my husband's home right now, thankfully, so I've been getting this podcast done, but I don't know how much more I'll get done once he goes back to work. So yeah, I will talk to you guys later. Let me know in the comments how you like this podcast. Check us out on Spotify. If you're already on Spotify, check us out on YouTube. And yeah, peace. Bye.